Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to wait just a few moments to make sure everyone's connected. All right, I'll go ahead and get started with my end of things. Good afternoon. It is February 14th, 2024. I'm Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is a status conference on water right application 30166 filed by El Sur Ranch for a permit to appropriate water from the Big Sur River in Monterey County. This status conference is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. The audio and video are being recorded, and we will post a file of this recording along with the Zoom generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us, please email us at adminhrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov. AHO staff are monitoring that inbox and can let me know. Assisting me today are the several staff of the Administrative Hearings Office. We have Nicole Mullen, Skylar Anderson, and Kyle Woldridge. And with that, I will go ahead and move to appearances as we usually do. I will identify each of the parties who have filed NOIs, and if you would then please, if you're representing that party, unmute your microphone and state your name. I would appreciate it. And we will start with the applicant, El Sur Ranch, or James J. Hill III.
This is Tom Berliner on behalf of the applicant.
And Julianne Ainsley.
Thank you both. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
And I see we have Montrose Environmental represented here as well. If both of you would like to introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Ken Schwartz here from Montrose Environmental, supporting the applicant.
Hi, Patrick Donaldson, Montrose, supporting the applicant as well.
And I believe Mark Blum is on.
Mr. Blum, are you able to, I see you're not muted, but we don't hear you. There may be an audio problem. Well, let us know if you continue to have a problem, and we'll let you work on it. And feel free to jump in when you're able to and introduce yourself, Mr. Blum. I will go ahead and move forward. California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance.
Chris Schutz for California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Center for Biological Diversity. Ventana Wilderness Alliance. Trout Unlimited. Carmel River Steelhead Association. Monterey Waterkeeper. California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Good afternoon, Kathleen Miller for DFW.
Thank you. Good afternoon. California Department of Parks and Recreation.
Good afternoon. This is Emma Severson for State Parks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. National Marine Fisheries Service. And the California Coastal Commission.
Good afternoon, Braylon Ammon with the Coastal Commission.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, Katie Butler with the Coastal Commission as well.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on the line who has not yet had a chance to introduce themselves who intends to participate today?
I'm Tom Ingalls. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself at the beginning with Montrose.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ingalls. So the purpose of this status conference today, well, first I should mention, just so you're probably aware, but on January 22nd, the AHO did submit, and they were somewhat late, and I apologize for that, comments to the applicant on the draft project description and the draft screening memorandum for purposes of developing this additional environmental review document for CEQA. That's available on the AHO FTP site. It's under the hearing documents, and then the folder that I think is titled CEQA. So you can find it there. An agenda for today. First, I would like to hear any updates about discussions between the Coastal Commission and the applicant. Just briefly, I think when we talked last, you indicated, Mr. Berliner, that there was a plan to meet with the Coastal Commission, and it would be great to hear both from you and then from our representatives from the Coastal Commission about where those discussions stand. I think then the next step would be to talk about a target date for circulating either a draft, maybe a draft of the EIR, or however we want to phrase it. And then also setting our next status conference. So that's what I see. And then if there's anything else, please, of course, feel free to speak up and we can discuss those issues.
I think,
Ms. Ainsley, please go ahead.
I think we do have a couple questions about the project descriptions coming from Montrose with respect to some of the comments that were made by the HO.
Great. We can talk about those too. Maybe the thing to do first, let's hear from the Coastal Commission, and then we can address those questions, and then we can talk about a target date for the EIR. And I'm going to look to my team as well, Mr. Anderson. Just a heads up that I may be looking to you too for any clarification with respect to our comments on the project description and draft screening memo. So be aware. So I will turn to you, either Mr. Berliner or Ms. Ainsley. Would you care to summarize where we are in the conversation with the Coastal Commission? We'll start there.
And if Mark Blum is able to speak, I'll defer to him.
Okay.
I am present. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're on the phone, so that worked out. Yes, thank you.
Good. My apologies. My camera and mic went dead, but I've joined you by phone. Right. So our initial outreach to the Coastal Commission was in March of 2022. We applied to the County of Monterey for something they call Development Review Committee and reviewed the proposed project as it stood at that time. Coastal Commission staff participated in that meeting. Written comments were received from the county and the various participants, but not from Coastal Commission staff. However, I did get some oral feedback from Coastal Commission staff at that time, which we took into consideration. Most recently, we had a site visit scheduled for February 15. That fell apart evidently, but is rescheduled for March 6 with Coastal Commission staff at the project site. At least that's what I've been informed, and it would be good to hear Coastal staff's confirmation.
Yes, we're on for the 6th.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Blum. Is there anything else? I'll turn to the Coastal Commission if there's anything you want to add with respect to either where you understand things stand, or with respect to the protests that the Coastal Commission filed to the applicant. I mean, really, where I'm coming from here is just to clarify that it sounded like a strong protest to the proposed project, and we're moving forward with a CEQA document. So it's just making sure that there's proper communications. We don't get too far ahead of ourselves on a CEQA document if significant modifications need to be made to the project. That's really what my aim in bringing these discussions forward and to the center is. But Mr. Blum, did I hear you on the phone? Did you have something else to add?
Yes. No, nothing further to add.
Okay.
I think our response to the Coastal Commission protest speaks for itself. But we're certainly looking forward to the dialogue and do intend to follow through with that and incorporate as much as we can into the CEQA document.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Ammon, do you have anything that you would like to comment on from the Coastal Commission?
Sure, just very briefly. Yes, gonna visit the site on the 6th, which we're looking forward to, and hopefully, that can help start answering some of the questions that we have about what's proposed and what the site history here is. I think going forward, and we can talk about this more with the applicant here. It's definitely going to be helpful to get more documentation getting at some of the issues that we raised in our protest letter, including the history of use at this site and permitting history. I think that'll all be very helpful. I understand, this protest process is not something that we typically engage in, and it's not something that we're completely familiar with, but we figured that it was an appropriate time to voice some of our concerns, as you indicated before, a project that isn't ultimately going to work out gets too far down the road. And I guess I would agree that our protest letter speaks for itself in many ways. We still have really substantial concerns about what's being proposed here, both with the overall withdrawals, which I understand is not part of this discussion per se, but specifically with the reservoir itself. So yeah, I mean, that's where we're at, and looking forward to talking more with the ranch about all of this. And Katie, feel free to add whatever you'd like.
No, I think you covered it. I would just also add that our site visit on March 6th is also going to include representatives from Monterey County. Is that true? That's correct, right? Yes. So
Yes.
just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you both. Well, and I want to thank both of you for joining us here. It's really helpful to have you participate and hear from you directly. And I appreciate your time to do that. And also I'm glad that there is a site visit set up. I know you'll have more information all of you will have more information once you have a chance to get out there and actually see the site and have further discussion. So I look forward to hearing updates about those discussions as they come along. And thank you once again for being here. I appreciate it. I think next, maybe it would be an appropriate time to turn to any questions the applicant may have about, or Montrose may have really more directly about the AHO's comments on the project description or the screening memorandum. I think this would be a good time to move there. So Mr. Schwartz, I see you're off mute, so I'll look to you.
Yeah, hi. That sounds very good. And
Great.
I'll be coordinating here a little bit with my colleagues, Patrick and Julianne. And I don't know if it's helpful to maybe pull up the comment letter as a reference and then to walk through it a little bit. Maybe that's useful. Or alternatively, we do have some comments that are questions related to topics 2, 5, and 6, all having to do with kind of the geography of the site. And we thought we'd pull up a map just to walk through some of the components, and what we're really searching for here is kind of a common understanding of what is included in the project. And because there's from the comments, there seems to be a little bit of just uncertainty or confusion about some of the acreage sizes.
Great. What would be best in terms, so if you have a map that we don't already have, I think you'll need to email that to us because we have control of the screen share.
Okay.
So that would be something, maybe, I don't know if someone can do it in the background and get it emailed over, and then we can screen share from our end. In the meantime, maybe, I don't know if we can pull up our comment, the AHO's comment letter, if you think that would be the most helpful to start with.
Sure, let's do that. And I think Patrick emailed the map we were hoping to pull up earlier this morning. Isn't that right, Patrick? Did you email it in?
I didn't yet. Julianne, did you want to do that? Do we have a version that we're ready to share here? I can do it too. But
I think that I think the version that I think you last circulated, as long as, I don't know if it was stamped a draft, as long as it's with the understanding of the participants here that, this is a draft. We've been kind of reacting and trying to analyze the comments that the AHO, of course, provided to us. I think that would be fine. I don't think this is our formal necessarily submittal. I think this is just what we're kind of all looking at as we discuss the issues and trying to go back and do some deep factual digging into, you know, obviously what occurred with the last EIR in 2008 or 9.
Right.
You're right. Like so this is sort of a reference guide that we've been flipping up on the screen. And that would be fine with me with that understanding. And we
Right.
understand that you asked us to submit figure 2.2, and that's what we're grappling with. So I don't want to consider this the formal submission of our draft 2.2, but like I said, this is what we've been looking at when we've been just trying to discuss the issues herein. So I'm happy
Understood.
Patrick wants to send that for flipping up on the screen to the AHO.
Okay.
That would be great. And we will make sure it's marked as a draft. And I understand it's a draft. This is not a final submittal, and we'll mark it as a draft. But I think it's quite
Not
helpful
even
to
a
look
final
at.
draft submittal. It's
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's
just-
yes,
we're
it is
kicking around trying to
a
grapple.
work in progress.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so
A discussion topic.
that's right. And we appreciate comments on
Yeah.
same, but
So while that's in process, I can see Patrick's busy sending that along. If it makes sense, we can actually maybe jump out and talk schedule for a minute and then come back
Okay.
to this once this is loaded.
Okay.
'Cause I know that was on the agenda as well. So you know, and yeah, what are we going to call this? I mean, for now, I think we were referring to it as an administrative draft EIR document that would be shared with AHO, and from there, I'm not sure. This wouldn't be you know, public distribution document yet. This is a work in progress document.
Right.
We were targeting a July 1st submittal, is what we thought was achievable, and we thought would be a good idea to check in with you along the way, maybe mid-April or so. We're here in mid-February, and that would be about 2 months out.
Yep.
And that would be a good time to check in, let you know how progress is going, if there are any outstanding issues. And then our goal would be to, you know, have something ready to submit by July 1st.
Great. That all sounds very good to me. So we can, I think while this is happening in the background, maybe we can all of us turn to our calendars and look at mid-April.
so one idea that we had before going forward was that
Sure.
this was intended to be, you know, just to let you know that the parties to know that we're still on track for that sort of July admin thing. And so we were thinking, and I'm just proposing that if everything is on track and we're still looking good with no questions, we could just send an email reporting that status. But if there needs to be a scheduled hearing, we could let you know. You know what I mean? If there were significant issues starting to crop up that the parties need to address, then we could ask for a status conference. But of course, if you want to schedule one, that's fine.
Let's do it in what I'd like to do is maybe do it in the reverse, where we'll set a status conference time. And then if you report that you're on, in about a week in advance, we can set a deadline, you report you're on track and there's nothing else has come up along the way. Then we can just take it off the calendar if that works for everyone here. I was looking tentatively at April, the week of April 15th. Are there any days that are not workable for any of us on the phone?
Ms. Kinsey, I'm out of town that week and
Okay.
except for Friday when I have to participate in a memorial. So that's a bad week.
Let's do a different week.
Thank you.
How about the next week?
It's better.
The week of April 22nd. Is there anyone who has a conflict that week? That you know of? Okay, so I would
Just
look
that Wednesday.
just the Wednesday. Okay, we won't do Wednesday. What about 1 o'clock on April 23rd? That's Tuesday, April 23rd. With the intent that I'd set a deadline when I send out the notice, I'll set a deadline of a week before, asking, particularly from the applicant and from Montrose, about whether you have a need for a status conference. But any other party could request a status conference as well, and then we'd keep it on the books. We have our date and time. But if we don't, the intent would be to just go ahead and cancel that. Looking to the room, 1 p.m. on April 23rd. We will aim for that. That sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for that.
Sure. Sure, that sounds good. And then one other thing, I'm just reminded here on July 1st, well, that's a Monday. July 4th is, I think we can still target that. There's the July 4th, but that's the Thursday. That shouldn't get in the way too much. So I think we'll stick with July 1st as the target date.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so well, that's good. We got that kind of
Yeah,
roadmap
great.
out. And let's maybe we have access to the figure now.
The map. All right, I'll look to my team. Ms. Mullen, did we receive, or Mr. Anderson, did we receive the map, and are you able to put it up on the screen?
It has been received.
It has been received. We should be able to put it up on the screen then. It may take a moment or two.
Okay, well, while it's coming up, what we can do is take a look at the second comment here, and I'll read, and it has to do with the riparian right claim, but again, the broader topic here is just the overall site geography and the size and the acreages, et cetera. And it says that the description on page 9 of the proposed place of use, excerpted below, appears to contain conflicting information about the place of use for El Sur Ranch. Riparian right. Okay, good. Everyone can see the figure now?
Yes.
Great. And this is similar to figures we've seen in the past here. And I think that the goal today is to really kind of walk through conceptually before necessarily getting into numbers. I think there's some confusion on how these acreages have added up based on the 2011 EIR and then the Fifth Amendment. There's some differences, what was included, what wasn't. But if we could kind of walk through this conceptually and say, this is in the project, this is what we're talking about, we could then maybe come back what we were thinking in a couple weeks or less with some numbers and try and get to basically consensus on the acreages involved. But for today, just walking through this a little bit.
Thank you. And Ms. Mullen, I don't know if I can't read the text. I mean, I can see the map. Is it possible to make this bigger? It is. I know she's good at these things. There we go. I can read it now. Thank you.
Okay. So just broadly looking at this before maybe we get into the text on comment 2, there are 4 primary polygons involved here, but there are other features as well, right? So we have the 2 irrigated pastures, existing irrigated pastures. Those are seen in color here. We have and I'm a little colorblind, so if I reference something the wrong color, excuse me. But then we have the off-stream storage reservoir. That's the new reservoir feature shown in kind of a golden color here. And we also have kind of toward the northwest here, we have this replacement pasture in the northern area that would be basically added as a place of use for new pasture area replacing. And the overall goal here was not not really an expansion of any irrigated use, but really an offsetting from the loss of the reservoir. But there are some other features here that have added some confusion. So we've got Swiss Canyon in the center, and that's it's a ravine in a sense. It's a natural water course. It's an incised stream, fairly steep banks on either end, and there's kind of a riparian corridor there. And that's shown kind of right in the middle of the project map here. And again, I mentioned that because historically it seems to have been references where that area had been included in kind of irrigated amount and not included in the sentences in the lower part of part 2. I think it's here or maybe it's elsewhere, but this area, it's actually section 6, that the Swiss Canyon area had received incidental seepage, basically irrigation from the adjacent parcels that kind of work their way through, maybe daylight through the stream banks or come up because it's a fairly incised creek and it was receiving some incidental, but not purposefully irrigated area. And another feature here that adds to the mix on the area is the tailwater recovery pool. That's shown here. There was a question in the comments about the kind of the engineering and the connectivity between the tailwater pool and the new reservoir and how might that work. And we can get into that a little bit too. But those are the 6 kind of primary components. Now, from there, well, let me actually ask Patrick, anything else you'd like to say as we introduce and get a little further into this?
Just that, yeah, kind of like you hinted at, some of the confusion I think just stemmed from us trying to incorporate or reconcile things from the past EIR. And so it was a little confusing to me in that the final EIR had modified some language about Swiss Canyon from the original draft to include it as part of the place of use. But then they hadn't updated the figure that was in the final EIR. So to me, it did seem like, you know, based on the most recent sort of CEQA step that they had decided to include it. So just trying to weave that in. It wasn't shown on this, but, you know, I think we just want to ultimately get clarification on that. And then, you know, the riparian issue was also, there was a figure, the original figure 2-2 from the EIR shows a mapped riparian area, and just pointing out that, you know, the pump house field that, you know, would basically be taken up now by the reservoir was where a lot of that riparian area, you know, was mapped. So it's kind of going away in a sense. We're still working on tracking down, you know, the original data and getting more clarity on like how much would actually be left. But so I just generally, some of those questions come down to us trying to reconcile the prior EIR with, you know, what the project is now and just being clear. So
right. So thanks, Patrick. So I think one question is, you know, and it's noted here in comment 6 on page 3, where it says HO staff would likely request that the additional 19 acres referring to Swiss Canyon that are irrigated as the result of seepage should not be included in irrigation requirements calculations because the irrigation is unintended. So that seems pretty clear from that point of view. But in comment 5, there were some numbers that we were a little confused about. And I'm looking at the paragraph that says the description states that the place of use is 319 acres, including non-irrigated areas like the proposed reservoir in Swiss Canyon, of which 246 will be irrigated acres. And then HO staff using ArcMap estimates the proposed place of use encompassing the project area to be approximately 400 acres. So we had a question for the AHO staff, which is how did you guys get to 400 acres? Because between the 297 of irrigated plus the 28 replacement, we just weren't sure how it added up to 400. We weren't getting anything near that as we were drafting and looking at some of these areas.
I can answer that because that was the number that I came up with. This is Kyle Aldrich. So that's just looking at the map, the GIS map, and tracing around the entire project area is 400 acres.
Ah, okay. So kind of a perimeter.
Yes. And then 297 is the 3 fields. The lower one, the 3 purple fields on this screen. If you do that on ArcMap, that is 154 acres, 115 acres, and 28 acres, adding to 297.
Okay, and the other 103 are kind of just non-irrigated, just surrounding buffering areas.
Yeah, Ms. Kinsey, if I could share my screen, and I have the map pulled up.
Great.
Showing. It's not anything official, but
is this your map? This is the map that you created?
On my computer, yeah. This is where I got that number, I guess. It's the...
And we can share that. You can feel free to. We can pull that up. We will share that. What we should do is save that and make it available to everyone, and we can do that after this. Conference.
Okay.
And I just wanted to add, it's my understanding that when the purple areas, and obviously Montrose will correct me, but the purple areas, I think by our calculations, when the original 5th amended map was done, was totaling 246 acres because we were trying to, like, Dr. Schwartz said, we were trying to merely offset the amount that would be covered by the reservoir. So yeah, we are interested in seeing how numbers add up because it seems like there's a lot of ways it could be done, and we did that map 1 of 3 pretty carefully with the 5th amended.
So could we get walked through this and then
Are you
maybe
able to,
provide some preliminary responses? Because I'm not quite following this drawing other than it looks like blue lines follow where there's water.
Right. I think Mr. Wooldridge is going to walk us through this.
so
Right.
I'm not sure how it shows up on your screens, but again, and this is drawn mostly by hand, so it's not precise. But I've got the reservoir down here, it's lower field, which is 154 acres.
Kyle, would it be possible to deselect the blue line streams?
Yeah, I can do that. And then the middle field is 115 acres, and then the upper field is 28 acres.
Right. So that gives you the 297.
That gives you 97 of irrigated acres.
Right. So that's the 297. And as you said, everything within the yellow is that additional 103 that brings up to the 400 number.
So that this kind of greenish yellow line, which surrounds the entire perimeter, including the reservoir, is 407 acres.
Okay. So that helps us understand that's more of, again, just kind of a general site area, and not a specific, more of a general project area.
Right.
Yeah.
And if, just for my benefit, maybe Mr. Schwartz, if you remind me, were there differences in does what Mr. Wooldridge has done here with the purple shaded areas, does that match your estimate of the acreage or roughly estimate of the acreage of those fields?
We were still working on that. Patrick,
I can probably answer that, Ken.
yeah.
Basically, no, it doesn't. We're pretty confident on the 246,
Okay.
just from our map. But this is interesting to see. So, yeah. And then the 292 is, I think, what we had for our place of use, not including Swiss Canyon. So it looks like, he is including Swiss Canyon there.
Right.
Right. So it's
Swiss Canyon's not included in the, it's included, yes, in the 400.
in the 400. Right. But Patrick, as far as our draft acreage amounts on the 3 primary parcels here, that's where we're getting up to 292. So we're 5 acres off compared to this.
Let me take a look. I think that actually came out to 246 for us, the net irrigated, which is like the existing, which are the 2 bigger pastures on the right and the replacement pasture on the left. I'll look at this real quick, but I think it was, that came out to 246 for us.
Okay. So, right. And because they have a 246 as well, but somehow they got to 297.
Yes, significantly larger than 246, and the possibilities for why the numbers are different, can be various things. It could come down to some sort of GIS mapping difference. It could come down to inaccurate lines, but I'd be surprised if it would be that much different.
Okay. The fact that we were both kind of coming up with 246 somewhere in the calculation suggested there was some alignment somewhere, but maybe not. Maybe
I don't have 246 anywhere.
The description states that the place of use is 319 acres, including non-irrigated acres, of which 246 will be irrigated acres. That's where we saw the 246, but
that's in the project description, yes.
Okay, that's you citing us. But your staff are coming up with 297. So back to, hearing officer Kinsey, I mean, it seems like we're looking at this a little differently. And I don't know if, what the right path here. I mean, we were going to, continue to refine this, look at this more carefully. We can submit what we believe is our draft map that we're using for your review and your team's review. And that could be maybe an offshoot meeting if we need to have a technical meeting about how the GIS was developed, but that is where we're at right now.
That makes sense. No, I don't expect answers right at this moment. It's helpful to see that we've teed up this question and I don't want to call it discrepancy. It just sounds like there's figuring it out. But I think maybe I'll turn Mr. Wooldridge. What would be most helpful to you to see from the Montrose team where their calculations are coming from? Is getting a map or having a follow-up discussion? What do you think would be the best path forward to resolve this?
Well, I think we were hoping that the map 2.2 would be able to show, but
that would help. That would be a good point. So now it sounds like we have this draft, a draft of a draft, a working draft of figure 2.2, if you will.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can take our time to review that. And if we have additional questions, we can set up we could call it a status conference or a meeting that would be open to all of the parties and talk through those if needed.
That sounds good. We're going to keep at it a little bit here and be able to provide something that has the acreages associated with each of the parcel pieces so that we can talk apples and oranges when we get there. Or apples and apples, rather.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick or Jolene, anything else on the mapping topic, or I think we're okay and we'll move forward and work with Mr. Woolridge on that.
So that was 2.5 and the Swiss Canyon issue of number 6, correct?
Yeah, 2.2. It comes up in the overall kind of geography of 2.2 on the riparian right, 2.5 the place of use, and then 2.6 the Swiss Canyon. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and so from here, we've I don't know if Julianne, you want to bring up on the back on page 4, there are a number of a few comments related to the screening report. I think those are understandable. I don't think we had any additional questions on those. So we understood the guidance there and things to pay attention to. But in comments, 1 through 10, Julianne, I wasn't sure if you wanted to follow up on any other additional questions for the AHO team.
I think that I think Tom and I were discussing number 1, but I think we should see and make sure there's nothing that Montrose doesn't have on. I think that with just for the AHO's reference, we have discussed all these obviously and we're working on them. With number 4, we understand that comment and will conform anything that is written or rewritten.
Yeah.
I think that with number 9, we're checking with Provost and Pritchard to see if there are any operational modifications involving the use of the tailwater pond or the recovery pond, and if that's going to change in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know if Mark has any update on that, and then
yeah, similar.
Number 8, I think we had come to a resolution. We could provide an update about measures that were in the settlement agreement that are, and Dr. Schwartz can correct me, but if they're actual like management programs or projects that are implemented on the ranch, I think that they would be included. I don't know if I can pull an example out of the air, but of course, I think that they would be analyzed. Is there a better way to say that, Dr. Schwartz, for number 8?
No, I think if they're, foreseeable activities within the project, then yeah, they'd be included for analysis. But as part D says here, if they're, not involving the ranch or really the project, then they may be outside of the scope of what's evaluated.
And that makes sense to me. I think that fits my understanding and the intent behind that comment. So
Great. And on number 7, this one's a little bit more of a kind of a engineering or facility. Oh, sorry, Julianne, did you want to keep going on 8?
No, I'm fine with you. Go ahead. Number 7.
Okay, just 7. Yeah, I mean, our understanding here, this is more of an engineering topic, but that irrigation line extension would be entirely outside of that unnamed crossing. It's going to be elevated, and we don't think it will have any interaction with any kind of jurisdictional area related to that waterway.
That's helpful. I think we were the engineers on the team rightfully were and scientists were thinking, how is that going to work?
Yeah. And 9, Julianne raised about tailwater pond. That's still an engineering topic that will be further described. You have a couple questions about here. How is that going to work? Kind of the plumbing and the connections and all of that. But we'll further describe that when that's figured out.
Great. And then if I may circle back briefly to the riparian right claim, I'm not sure we finished our conversation or I would just close that loop. It sounded to me like there's some additional work that needs to be done to analyze that question about the potential riparian acreage that would remain.
So I think that Dr. Schwartz or Mr. Donaldson said earlier, you know, some of that riparian area that had been identified in the EIR, there are some older surveys. So we were scrambling, trying to find like the older surveys. You know, if you were to map things, you know, we wanted to find where the sources of those maps came from before we just started hash marking things. But the reservoir will overlay some of the area that was previously identified in the EIR as riparian. So we are working to find a way to accurately update those figures, or, you know, or provide you with the answer of what acreage would be left.
Great. Understood.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. That is one of the ongoing, that's why we haven't quite finished figure 2.2 yet, because we're still working on that.
Right.
It was definitely a survey that well predated the hearings in 2010 and 2011. So
No, and I realize that there has been an evolution. These maps some are more accurate than others, and so it really is. I've worked through a couple of them, and then I understand the challenge.
Yeah, and we've jumped around quite a bit here, but coming back to some order, I don't think we've touched on 10, which was the in-stream flow recommendation, and the guidance like here really just states that, you know, the State Water Board is required to consider CDFW's flow recommendations, and so we understand that. So, and so we will. The request here is that the revised project description should note the CDFW in-stream flow recommendations.
Yes, I think that I just wanted to ensure that's incorporated into the EIR, into it. Just note that it's there, because we will have to consider it.
Right. And like I said, I don't think we had any follow-up questions regarding the screening report. So I think it really does come back to, you know, trying to correctly decipher and describe the geography of these components, including the riparian area, and coming up with a base map that everyone can look at and say that's our understanding of the project site. So that's what we're working towards.
Great, thank you. I think it would be appropriate. I'd like to turn to the room and see if they're on these topics that we've had this exchange between the AHO team and Montrose and the applicants team. But are there questions or comments from any of the other parties at this point about the issues we've talked about? And we will make, as I said, we will make available the figure that Mr. Wooldridge displayed, the working draft figure that we received from Montrose and displayed. So those will be available on the AHO FTP site. We'll probably put it in, maybe what I'll do is put it in a separate folder to indicate it was from our discussion today during this particular status conference. So you can all see that. Yes.
circling back on that just one more time with this deliverable, how are we planning on coordinating between Mr. Woolridge and Montrose? With back to the working out the acreage thing, was the first step to simply, you know, as we're working on trying to identify the map and assign acreages using our GISs, you know, is that something that we should provide? How?
Maybe I'll look to you, Mr. Wooldridge. I mean, one is, I know you want to take a look at this working draft that we just received and work through that, but is there anything else at this point? I mean, what I think we could do, what I would propose, and Mr. Wooldridge, you can correct me, is that you work through the map and then we can come up with, if there are additional questions, we can send an email to everyone. Once again, everyone will be CC'd and we can set up what I would maybe call a technical meeting where all would be invited to attend, but it could be a technical conversation. So it'd be somewhat like a status conference, but more informal. But all the parties could participate that way. Mr. Wooldridge, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'm looking at this working draft of figure 2.2 that was just emailed. And what I'm hoping to see is just the acreage for each of those purple sections on that map.
So that would be helpful follow-up information.
Because then we can start to see why there's a discrepancy between what I did on the ArcMap project and what you guys have.
And then I'm a lawyer question, not an engineering question. I'll turn to you first, Mr. Wooldridge. You get to, on the fly, advise me in front of everyone. How much does terrain affect the GIS mapping acreage estimates? Is that a factor here? Like canyons and things like that?
I suppose it could affect it if we're talking really rugged terrain.
Really steep? Okay, I mean the cows go on it, so
yeah. I guess I don't think it would add up to 50 acres.
Right. Okay.
But I can't say that for certain.
Okay. Mr. Schwartz, did you want to follow up on that? It's only fair if you could.
Oh, no, I guess where you were getting at is the difference between kind of a sloping area versus a surface flat,
yeah, I mean,
extended trigonometry basically
right.
of that. And over a large area that can influence it. I don't think on a site this small.
Yeah.
But I think we'll put our heads together and we'll figure out the differences here.
Okay. Good.
It's a good thought, but yeah, I don't think it's
I was curious. That's why I thought I'd ask. Ms. Ainsley, was that enough to address?
I think that's what probably Mr. Woolridge said before. I just wanted to make sure I heard it, since procedure is kind of a sticky issue here with the whole group and stuff like that. I mean, I don't mind if they have a technical meeting, obviously, but I want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. How you want it done. But yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay. I think since we have is there anything else, Mr. Schwartz, that you want to add? When we have our status conference on the books for April 23rd, we may have a technical meeting. It sounds like we probably will have a technical meeting to talk through more of these acreage issues. Is there anything else that we need, any other dates or anything that we need to set or should set today, talk about today?
nothing else from our end.
Okay. Ms. Ainsley, is there anything, or Mr. Berliner, is there anything else on the applicant's end do you think we should talk about today?
Yeah, we have a concern regarding paragraph number 1, and just want to make sure that we're on the same page here with this. The letter changes how the settlement agreement is referred to. And well, it sort of does and it doesn't. And I want to make sure that we're coming from the same spot on this. And if we're not, then we need to talk about it. And we know that the applicant and CDFW have a different view of what's been settled and what happened. I don't know if the water board has a different view as to what's settled and what hasn't. But the concern that we've got is that the parties have negotiated a variety of terms, and what I'll refer to as the settlement agreement, just for purposes of this conversation, sets forth a variety of items that the parties have come to agreement on, and then identifies in section 6 those items that are still unresolved and for which the parties continued to negotiate and actually did make progress on one additional item, which is the toggling back and forth between 75 CFS bypass flow and the 55 CFS bypass flow. And we came up with a 14-day, 5-day formula that we agreed on, where if the river dropped below the 75 for 14 days during the winter, then basically consecutive days during the winter, the flow would drop to 55 CFS, and if it exceeded the 75 for 5 days, it would go back up to the 75 CFS. So 14 days to go down, 5 days to go back up. That's kind of how I simplified it. And we did reach agreement on that. We had a variety of positions that I don't have to bother with getting into at this point. And we did agree on that. The other two issues were still open. And they're significant issues. But we'd have provided a mechanism for resolving those, which was to come to the state board and have this proceed. Otherwise, we would have presented you with, here are all the items that we agreed on. The only thing left open to the water board is to figure out what to do with a 100% settlement agreement between two parties. But we didn't have 100%. We had what we presented. That was our understanding until recently. And I mean, frankly, from our perspective, it still continues to be our understanding that those issues are resolved. And we've had discussions with all the parties that were actively engaged in the settlement negotiations. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Schutz or the others that were involved in those discussions. They can speak for themselves. But it was certainly my understanding that all parties had agreed to the items that were set forth in the draft settlement agreement, and that the reason it was called draft was twofold. One was there were unaddressed terms that were waiting for the water board to slide something in there, and the agreement itself was never finalized with, and as it identifies with all the typical boilerplate that you would find in a settlement agreement, and there was no conformance yet of those terms such that the water board could say, okay, we can lift wholesale this term and issue an order based on it. So it concerns us that there's a question about the binding nature of the settlement agreement between the parties. We understand, of course, that we can't bind the water board to anything. The water board has to take all of this, give it due consideration, et cetera, and issue an order. That as far as the water board is concerned, this is a proposal between the parties, and it's up to the water board to make the final decision. So we're not seeking to usurp anything at the water board. This is strictly between the parties. And it's our view that we did reach an agreement. And it's not just, oh, this is another proposal, and thanks very much for making the proposal. This was the subject of years of discussions between the parties, including, all the way up to the director on multiple meetings with CDFW and the applicant. And so we're a little concerned as to what the view is of the water board of where those issues stand with respect to continuing to discuss those. The water, because, you know, as I'm looking at what the water board has put forth, the water board understood that the parties had resolved various issues between themselves. Whether the water board buys off on those or not, it's another story. But as between themselves, those were settled. And most recently, it's our understanding that there's now a different view at CDFW. They've changed attorneys and there's a different view, and that those are not terms necessarily agreed to. And then I don't know. I don't want to characterize. I mean, you've got counsel for CDFW on the call, so I'll defer to them to describe however they see the agreement if we need to get into that. But I wanted to make sure that you understood how we're perceiving what transpired between roughly 2011 and 2022 as a result of many, many meetings and a lot of work.
Thank you, Mr. Berliner. I will certainly turn to you, Ms. Miller, to comment on this. I'll add from my perspective, it's my understanding, and you can also clarify for me, Ms. Miller, it's my understanding that there was I don't know what to call it. At one point, there seems to have been a meeting of the minds, I guess we can say. And then now it seems that there is no longer a meeting of the minds on these. And we're left in a situation where there's no, as far as I know, CDFW is not legally bound to the former terms that were discussed and did not withdraw their protest. So I'm left in a situation where that protest it's still active, it's still live. I mean, maybe this is a legal issue we should get into as to whether or not, and I'm certainly willing to give an opportunity for all the parties to chime in on whether or not this agreement is binding in some way or should be considered the way it is. And maybe that's the way to approach this. For purposes of the CEQA document, we can think this through more about how to just asterisk the agree. I mean, it's a settlement agreement asterisk. There's a difference of opinion about what it is. But with those initial thoughts, I'll turn to you, Ms. Miller, if you'd like to comment on any of this.
Sure. I mean, I agree with Mr. Berliner that we have a different view of how binding that 2019 document is. In CDFW's view, that's not binding, until it's signed by our director, a regional manager, someone with authority to bind us to those terms. That being said, and maybe I've been inartful in describing this, is CDFW doesn't intend to reopen those, the winter bypass, the May bypass that have been, we reached some agreement on, but just as a matter of fact, it's labeled a draft agreement, it's not signed. And so we would just prefer it would be called a draft at this point. As written right now in the project description, it appears to purport that there has been some finalized settlement agreement, which there has not.
Yeah, and I should probably, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Berliner, please.
So I should probably we back up. The water board asked for a status conference or a pre-hearing conference back in 2019, which was held by then board member Dodak. And there was quite a bit of water board staff there. And the question that was asked of the parties at that time was, please tell the water board, this sort of broad description, all the facts that are in dispute, all the facts that you've agreed to, which didn't, just to be blunt about it, didn't seem to be an exercise that was worth doing at that time, both in terms of the level of effort that it would take to do it, and just kind of the practicality, given that we had reached an agreement, and I'm not seeking to give that special meaning, that's just a word I'm using. You can call it whatever you want, but then that was attached to the stipulation that was submitted to the water board, which, as far as I know, stipulations are then deemed to be binding, legally binding, when you stipulate to the water board or to the court that this is the position that you've taken, which certainly was signed, and to me seems to be binding, and the agreement was one of the attachments to that stipulation, and all of that was done so that we could inform the water board. It was unnecessary to go through all of the exercise that had been directed to the parties to go through in order to bring the clock forward to where we were after all of these discussions and time had gone by. So in order to short circuit that, we said, well, look, you know, here's a bunch of stuff we've agreed to. This needs to be now aired pursuant to a due process, you know, nature in front of the water board as a proposal by multiple parties, and, you know, gone through the typical water board process hearing, obviously a second hearing on the application regarding these things that various parties are putting forward. And there were multiple parties that had agreed to those things, as there were the same multiple parties participating in those discussions. So I'm actually, just to kind of cut to the chase, I think it would be appropriate if we had another discussion with Ms. Miller, because we may not, based on what Ms. Miller has said today, maybe we overread where the department was coming from, or maybe the department is articulating it a little bit differently. I want to make sure that the issue that I'm raising is an issue that we may need some briefing on or may not, and then get back to the AHO on following those discussions.
Thank you.
Because if we're not going to reopen those that we think we've come to agreement with, then if everybody says, yeah, those are terms we think are appropriate, then maybe this discussion is moot.
And I appreciate your proposal, because I was going to propose exactly the same thing, that it sounds like maybe there's room for a discussion here between the two, well, the two interests here, and then an update to the AHO to see if any additional action is needed. We'll put this question of what to call this agreement in the CEQA document that we can hold for now. I mean, at some point we'll need to resolve it, but let's set that aside for now. If the CDFW and the applicant can have a conversation and then update the AHO, and then we can decide if the briefing is needed. If the AHO needs to step in and make a decision, we can do that. But it would certainly be, I think, ideal if the parties can talk to each other and work this out.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was not an intentional omission here, and I didn't mean to in any way. Certainly Mr. Schutz was very actively engaged in those discussions, and there were a couple of his colleagues from time to time participating. So I think it would probably be appropriate. I think there might be two discussions to be had. I think one needs to occur with us directly with CDFW, but then I think if there's any change in proposal, that we should include Mr. Schutz and some of his colleagues in the discussion as necessary.
Great, thank you.
And I know we're all free to have discussions offline anyway, but I just, so that you understand it, I think our perspective is there were various parties very interested in what was being proposed and engaged in it.
Thank you. And I think it sounds like this may be something that would be an additional item potentially for the status conference on April 23rd, and the status report that would come in advance of that date, so that we can decide whether to keep it on calendar. I want to turn to the room. Ms. Miller, did you have something that you would like to add?
No, that sounds like a plan.
Okay. And is there any other party who would like to chime in on this discussion? Mr. Schutz, please.
So it took me a while, but I went back, and I think a relevant document that helps shed light on this is the joint hearing management conference statement submitted by Elster Ranch and CDFW on April 15, 2019. And they jointly characterized the settlement agreement there. So I'd suggest referral, reference to that document by both the ranch and Ms. Miller, in terms of what the positions presented to at that time, the water board were regarding that settlement, or the settlement document, let's call it. And I also wish to say that I appreciate both Mr. Berliner and Ms. Miller's pragmatism in not blowing up this discussion and agreeing to confer, and I hope that works out well. And I also agree that with Mr. Berliner that it following that discussion, it might be appropriate to bring in some of the NGO parties who were instrumental in trying to resolve some of these issues. And as far as our position is concerned, and I think I can speak for Mr. Boosie and myself and the other entity, I think it was Carmel River Steelhead, who filed a protest on distinct issues in this last round of protests. I think our position regarding what the outstanding issues are in terms of flows and whatnot are accurately stated in that protest.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz.
And Ms. Kunze, do you have that document that Mr. Schutz referred to? Because that is the same one that I was referring to. I believe you should have it, but if you don't, we can forward it to you.
The April 15th document? The April 15th joint status.
Yeah, this is
case management, hearing management, whatever it is called.
Yes,
yes,
correct.
We have it,
it's
and
titled Joint Hearing Management Conference.
Joint Hearing Management Conference Statement. Yes, we do. I have it. It's on the HO FTP site, and I cited it. The HO cited it in the letter discussion. I mean, in the response on this issue. So yes, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Berliner, for bringing up this. This sounds like an important issue, so I appreciate you bringing that up. And it sounds like we have a plan, at least for further discussion on this. Is there anything else we should address today? I'll look to all the parties if there are any other issues we should address today before we break. And then, as I said, I will send out a further notice with the April 23rd date and a deadline a week in advance for any party to submit issues. I'll probably ask for a status report update on discussions between CDFW and the applicant and any other parties to the extent that there's been discussions, and then we can decide whether to keep that date on the calendar. Anything else? Well, once again, thanks to all of you for spending your time here. I really appreciate it. I think this was quite productive, and we went through a variety of things, and I will possibly see you in April. If we end up taking the April date off calendar, we'll plan to meet sometime after July 1st. So as long as sounds like we're moving forward and making progress, and I appreciate that. So with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.